The night was still when the sound of footsteps broke the silence in Gethsemane. Torches flickered in the distance, and with them came betrayal. Judas, once a friend, now stood among soldiers. His kiss, a symbol of love, had become a signal of death. Jesus, knowing full well what this meant, didn't run. He stepped forward. "Who is it you want?" he asked. "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he." And at those words, they drew back and fell to the ground. John 18 verses 4-6, the divine authority in his voice, even in surrender, shook them. But still, he allowed them to bind him. Peter, gripped by fear and rage, drew his sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. But Jesus, even now, was healing. He touched the man's ear and restored it. "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" John 18 verse 11. This was the Jesus they didn't understand, a Savior who didn't resist suffering but embraced it. The disciples fled. The shepherd was struck, and the sheep scattered. Yet Jesus stood alone, resolute. He had prayed the night before, "Not my will, but yours be done." Now that prayer was becoming flesh. Bound, he was taken to the high priest, where lies and false witnesses awaited. Through the night, Jesus stood trial. First before Annas, then Caiaphas, then the Sanhedrin. Accusations flew like arrows, twisted words, misunderstood claims. "Are you the Son of God?" they finally asked. Jesus answered, "You say that I am." And they tore their robes, crying blasphemy. But the truth is not blasphemy. The truth simply stood silent. Isaiah 53 verse 7 had spoken of this moment. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Jesus, the righteous one, was being judged by the guilty. Peter, lurking in the shadows, watched from a distance. And when the pressure mounted, he denied him. 3 times. Then the rooster crowed. Their eyes met. Jesus didn't shout. He didn't condemn. His look was enough. And Peter wept bitterly. This is what failure looks like in the face of holiness. Yet even here, grace is at work. Because Jesus knew Peter's weakness, and he still called him to follow. Morning came, and the religious leaders, hungry for death, led Jesus to Pilate. The Roman governor found no fault in him. "What is truth?" he asked, staring into the face of truth itself. Pilate offered the crowd a choice, Jesus or Barabbas. Barabbas, a violent rebel. Jesus, a healer and teacher. "Give us Barabbas," they shouted. The same crowd that had once cried Hosanna, now cried Crucify him. Pilate washed his hands, but water cannot cleanse the conscience. He handed Jesus over to be flogged, and the soldiers, cruel and bored, mocked him. They twisted thorns into a crown and pressed it into his head. Blood ran down his face. They draped him in a purple robe, struck him, and spat on him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they jeered. And Jesus said nothing. The Lamb was silent. He was sentenced to die, though he had committed no crime. He was led through the streets of Jerusalem, bearing his own cross. The wood scraped against his torn back. Every step was agony. The same hands that had healed the blind now clung to splinters. Simon of Cyrene was pulled from the crowd to help him carry it. And still Jesus moved forward. Women wept. He turned to them and said, "Do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children." Luke 23 verse 28, even in pain, he spoke truth. Even in suffering, he taught. The Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering, was not just a road in Jerusalem. It was the path of redemption. The Son of God walked it willingly. They brought him to Golgotha, the place of the skull. There, they nailed his hands and feet to the wood. The sound of the hammer echoed into eternity. He was lifted up between 2 criminals. Above him a sign, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. It was meant as mockery, but it was the truth. He was a king, but not of this world. Soldiers cast lots for his clothing. Onlookers mocked him. "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." But he stayed, not because he couldn't descend, but because he chose not to. Love held him there, not nails. He looked down and saw his mother. "Woman, behold your son," he said, pointing to John. "Behold your mother." Even in agony, he was caring for others. Then one of the criminals beside him hurled insults, but the other rebuked him. "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Luke 23 verse 43, this is the gospel. A dying man with nothing to offer but faith is welcomed into eternity. And then, darkness covered the land from noon until 3. The light of the world was being extinguished. At that hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27 verse 46, it was the cry of the abandoned. The weight of sin, the collective guilt of humanity, pressed down upon him. He bore every lie, every betrayal, every murder, every hidden shame. The wrath of God was poured out, and Jesus drank every drop. At the end, he said, "It is finished." John 19 verse 30, not "I am finished," but it, the work, the mission, the debt. Then he gave up his spirit. The earth shook. Rocks split. The veil in the temple was torn from top to bottom. What once separated God from man was removed. Access was granted. The centurion, a Roman soldier hardened by war, looked up and declared, "Surely he was the Son of God." Matthew 27 verse 54, the sky was dark, the ground was broken, and heaven was silent. Jesus was dead. His body was taken down by Joseph of Arimathea, wrapped in linen, and laid in a borrowed tomb. A stone was rolled over the entrance. The King of Life lay in death, and for the first time in eternity, silence reigned. The disciples scattered, confused and afraid. The one they had hoped in was gone. The miracles, the teachings, the promises, what did they mean now? It felt like the end, but it wasn't. Because Good Friday is not just about death, it's about a death that changed everything. The cross is not the symbol of defeat, it's the throne of victory. Colossians 2 verse 15 says, having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. On the surface, it looked like failure. But in reality, Jesus was winning a war no one else could fight. He wasn't just dying, he was destroying sin. He wasn't just crucified, he was crowned. That's why we call it Good Friday. Not because it was painless, but because it was purposeful. Not because it was light, but because it brought light to the darkest places. And now, the cross stands as a permanent invitation. It tells us we are not alone, that every suffering has a Savior who understands, that every sin has been nailed to wood and paid in full, and that death, once final, has met its match. Jesus' final breath was not a whisper of defeat, but a roar of love. It shook the heavens, it tore the veil, it broke the curse, and it invites us still to come to kneel to believe.